drafting and took that into account. What would the cooler plate look like? So we've had some fantastic sessions in the Americas, and then we handed the baton over metaphorically. Diane handed the baton over the first time to the Americas. It was picked up by Kathy DeFilia from Practical Law. Then we had another Practical Law lawyer, Francis, hand the baton over to Sarah Barker. And Sarah Barker from Minter Ellison accepted that baton, and we've had quite a lot of Minter Ellison lawyers, but we've also had some other, it's been a really collaborative process in Asia Pacific, and we've had sessions on using model clauses in Australia, that kind of local translation piece to bring these clauses off the page and into life. We had carbon budget contracting, and that session, so you hear my Australian accent, but most people know that I'm based in London, so I've actually been sleeping for a few hours. But some highlights from that session where I've got some messages from one of the facilitators who said, someone said, I'm not an expert, and then 30 minutes later, smashing out an origin story. And so for those of you who haven't yet drafted with us, an origin story is the piece that you produce. Like all superheroes have origin stories, all our clauses have origin stories that explain what's the climate problem that they're solving, what's the legal solution, and how you use that. So for our Chancery Lane community to just come on board and have that origin story in half an hour is just so special. We had 22 ideas coming out from that carbon budgeting session. So we've got carbon completion accounts in M&A. So in the SBA documents, net carbon adjustment clauses, carbon budget service levels, open book carbon accounting, carbon accrual clauses, carbon border adjustment clauses, and a carbon bill of materials clause in a manufacturing agreement. That is lawyers taking their unique legal expertise and applying it to the climate problem for climate solutions. And so that is what we are here about today. We also had some fantastic sessions on using model clauses in Australia and using model clauses in construction and infrastructure contracts, as well as finance and corporate. And one of the facilitators said there, I asked for some highlights, and one of the highlights was Matt, which is very fair. As our founder and chair, Matt Gingell, when he comes to a session, it really is often a highlight. And so Mingzi has posted the post of the opening ceremony. If you want to be inspired by Matt Gingell, his speech there is tremendous. So please do watch that. Matt's a highlight. Also bouncing ideas off the in-house lawyers. So we've had in-house lawyers from some of our leading banks like NAB, Minter Ellison. So we've got private practice firms and also and other firms as well. So participants in Australia, I've heard you've been really engaged and joining the sessions. And again, this theme comes through. Someone showed up to one of the APAC sessions and said, oh, I'm not really sure, I haven't really done much. And then wasn't sure what they'd be able to contribute. And within 2 minutes, we're joining in the conversation and helping with the solutions. So that is just what we are here today to do. So that's where we've gone so far. Now we go to the formalities. So we have a metaphorical baton and Zali Stegall, former Olympian. I know if, like me, some of you might have been cheering Zali on at the Winter Olympics when you were younger. This is a real highlight. But some of you may have missed Zali's legal career because it wasn't televised, but it's no less important. So Zali is a barrister and has had a very esteemed legal career. So we're just delighted to have Zali here as in her capacity as an ex-Olympian, in her capacity as a barrister, and also in her capacity as the independent member for Parliament. At the Chancery Lane project, we are very clear we are politically and professionally neutral in coming up with our climate solutions. We have people from all different firms, multinational companies, barristers. We are working together. So we're just so delighted to have the independent member for Warringah speak to us, and very exciting that Zali is on Monday introducing the climate change bill into Australian Parliament. So for those of us here in the UK, we have a Climate Change Act. We've had it since 2008. Zali's read it because the Australian bill is very closely modelled on the UK Climate Change Act. And some of the drafting that we started with here in the UK, we have this net zero target in law, but our impact theory is that we can use our model clauses to bring that forward, accelerate that. And then the contractual drafting, we can accelerate that even more. Our impact theory that Matt explains in the opening plenary, there's that green area under the curve. That's our impact window, and that is what you're drafting for. So Zali, with that summary of where we've gone so far, I'd like to have you hold that baton up metaphorically. And we always ask our speakers, the people who are holding the batons, to share a little bit about what the Chancery Lane project means in the context of both your legal practice, if you could bring your barristers, wear your barrister's hat, but also as a member for Parliament looking to legislate for net zero emissions in Australia. How have you been involved in the Chancery Lane project so far, and why you think it's important? That's really key for us. So why Chancery Lane is important. And then if you could share about an idea, like an origin story or a clause that you've seen or something that you've heard us speak about today about its potential impact. So what is the potential impact that you see, and particularly in Australia, for the Chancery Lane clauses?
Okay, Ellie, well, thank you. No pressure. First, if I could say hello to everybody around the world. It's fantastic to see what we can do now with our communities. It really does make such a difference. Here in Australia, very important, I'd like to pay my respects to Indigenous elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge and pay my respects to their sorrow for the cost for what it costs them, but hoping that we can actually all come together in working for and creating better opportunities and a better care of our environment. So look, first I've got to say congratulations to the Chancery Lane Project Initiative, Ellie. I hear it's been a long haul in terms of just recent, but I think it is fantastic to bring so many skills around a virtual table in terms of, and being people all over the world in terms of being able to bring so much knowledge and resourcefulness. Like, I guess my passing of the baton, I've got behind me my Olympic torch back from the Sydney Olympics, which was a real baton in the sense of a torch relay, but I'm happy to take on the Chancery Lane Project baton pass. I guess in terms of Australia, we're a bit behind the 8 ball. We're a bit behind the relay is how I would position it. I came to politics after having a career in sport and then being a barrister for about 10 years. So I've been more involved in advocacy and litigation as a lawyer. But one of the things we all know we do a lot of is mediation, where you have to bring a lot of people with different views to the table and try and find the common ground and build out a solution. And sadly, that's what's been very missing in Australian politics for a long time. And actually since about the UK got its act together in passing the Climate Change Act in 2008, and Australia went down a different path. It passed legislation that was more prescriptive as to how to achieve lowering emissions, whereas the UK went down the path of let's at least all agree in a bipartisan way for a goal, put that into law, which creates a framework by which industry, private sector can get confidence of knowing that there is longevity in planning, that they can plan their investments. And as a result, it has really benefited many sectors in the UK. So the UK's legislation is very much a template and has been matched around the world and seen as that kind of, a gold standard of where you start to lock in a legislative framework to enable good emission reduction planning over a long course, and then how do you deliver it? So when I got into Parliament, as an independent, I'm down the middle. And for me, it was very much about how do I bring all our very divisive politics to the table for a sensible solution? And so the UK Act stood out in that way. And we have very much looked at replicating locking into law the net zero by 2050 with 5-year emission reduction budgets, which obviously are influenced by science and an independent climate change commission. And then, of course, we need risk assessment and adaptation and resilience planning. And anyone, you know, in Australia will know, but obviously around the world, you saw the images of Australia suffered the impacts pretty dramatically of climate change this year with the bushfires. And so we saw firsthand the impact it will have on every layer of society. So it is important legislation. Obviously, as an independent private member's business, I rely on the will of the people to actually push it forward. And so that's where I need everyone's help. But it has been really important in engaging in that discussion with all sides in what are our common concerns. And we have over 80% of Australians believe, you know, are concerned about climate change. 63% in the most recent surveys support net zero by 2050. All of Australia's trading partners, I know the UK and the Prime Minister for the UK has been, you know, certainly speaking to and asking our government to sign up to net zero and to come on board. Japan, South Korea, France, Germany, many countries are committed. And so it's a really interesting dynamic that's evolving where the world is moving on to acknowledging the targets that are needed. And obviously this will play a huge part when it comes to trade agreements and deals and border carbon tariffs. And when agreements, international agreements are going to be done, especially in a corporate sense. And that's where I think your initiative is, you know, really, really vitally important. This is going to play a part. You're either going to be at the table in the club, working out the solutions, especially when it comes to COP26 in Glasgow, which will be this time next year, or you will be behind the 8 ball and really, I think, then in negotiations, and there will be all sorts of impacts on the private sector of countries that aren't signed up to good policy. So obviously I'm making a lot of arguments for the government to come on board, and you know, there's a lot of other influences at play, but I think it's really important to acknowledge the role every sector can play in bringing about this outcome. So a big part of my campaign has been actually bringing on board the private sector business, because as you know, most businesses are extremely focused on their net zero and sustainability ambitions and commitments. They are facing pressures internally from employees. They face pressure from customers, they face pressure from shareholders. We've had a landmark case recently in Australia, litigation in relation to superannuation funds investment and disclosure of climate risks when it comes to investment. So this is a rapidly evolving space, I would say. So your project comes at, you know, is really perfect timing. That we need to see that incorporated on all layers from a contractual basis. Legislatively, Australia is very interesting. We have very little built into our legal framework around climate and climate disclosure. And so the more it can be incorporated in our drafting, contractual drafting, I think the more it will start to permeate and really start to rise. It is so incredibly significant that we acknowledge climate risk. I guess on the TCFD factor, I didn't include TCFDs in the bill because I think we need to walk before we can run. And in Australia, we need to build a consensus for a bipartisan approach to legislation that locks in our ambition, a framework on how to get there, and then we can start getting more technical when it comes to regulations. So that's where I'm at with the climate bill. It's really fascinating, and I'm really keen to see I will be watching and reading up on some of the things that have come out of your discussions, because there is a really important role to play for lawyers, for companies, for the private sector, especially when in a country like at the moment in Australia, the government is reluctant to lead or is still caught on old technologies. And actually, surprisingly, at the moment, we have quite a lot of interventionism into the market that's happening, which is quite interesting from a legal perspective. So it is, I think the world is changing. We know everyone, you know, the move is on, and it's the more it permeates through every sector, the better it will be. I had a fantastic call today with on building and construction again. So, you know, a big sector of emission reduction will be around building more sustainable buildings, you know, the combination between insurance industry, green lending from a mortgage point of view with banking, and then construction, and especially high volume housing. So there's and that is, you know, I would say a lot of bread and butter for lawyers when it comes to contractual drafting. There is great opportunity. So we need to drag the government there, but I think everybody needs to play their bit. And I see the Chancery Lane project as a really exciting way of introducing that climate disclosure and risk, and introducing it in the contractual obligations and negotiations. Really interesting. So I've probably gone on for too long. Sorry.
No, thank you so much, Zali. I'm delighted to hear, particularly you mentioned the construction infrastructure sector, because that was actually one of the sessions that we had running in APAC. So we were looking to put the clauses in construction infrastructure contracting, because there's so much that can be done there, because we know that that Australia's building development needs to be made resilient to climate hazards and to be built in a low emissions way. So really exciting to hear that.
Well, I'd encourage you to get involved. The Royal Commission report that just came out on the bushfires actually was quite weak on recommendations when it came to building resilience in our building codes. And that would be an interesting area that I'm sure a lot of lawyers could look at.
Terrific. So lawyers, particularly lawyers in Australia, ask you, Zali's put a call to action there to the Chancery Lane community to step up with that. There's an opportunity for impact. Wonderful. So Zali is holding up the metaphorical baton, not the Olympic one, but our Chancery Lane one. And to receive that is Carolyn May, so a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright here in the UK, the head of environment EMEA in the UK. So Carolyn, good morning. Welcome. Good morning. And so Carolyn will be receiving the baton. So my question's for you to share your insights. Could you place Chancery Lane in the context of your legal sector and let us know how you've been involved in the Chancery Lane so far, and then the potential impact here in the UK? And so now in the final, what do you hope to get out of this final stretch of the hack? So we're coming back to this time zone. What's your goals for this last stretch?
Okay. Well, thank you, Ellie, and good morning and good evening, everybody. I'd rather be drinking the champagne some of you have, I know, in Australia than my mug of tea this morning, but it is a little bit early for me to hit the champagne. Thank you, Zali, for that breathtaking, comprehensive survey of where you are and what you've been doing in Australia. I think looking at the age ranges we have on the call this morning, ranging from me, I think, down to Betty with Ben in London this morning, we can see the importance, and we can see how this has galvanized a younger generation to really get involved in this agenda. I am old enough, and probably I've been 30 years qualified now, so declaring my age, but I qualified as an environmental lawyer, and in those days that was very unusual indeed. It was one of the big Magic Circle law firms, Clifford Chance, formed an environment team with large numbers of lawyers, and we were expecting the market to explode in the same way it had in America with the toxic tort litigation. That did not happen, and 8 years later, when I moved on, the environment group had shrunk to 3, I think, trustee partners and their associates, and we were all on message and determined to push this agenda. But we were very much on our own. We were very much seen as probably land lawyers, people interested in conveyancing and contamination and oil spills, and in the dirtier side of things rather than the more positive. Renewable energy had yet to be born and really developed. Finance communities were not interested at all. I was barely asked to attend banks to talk about due diligence on the environmental side of things. No one was interested. Money was key. Who cared about the environment? That was for sissies and do-gooders, not for serious commercial lawyers. Well, my, how 30 years has changed that landscape. And a little over a year ago, Matt Gingell, our esteemed leader and inspired leader of the Chancery Lane project, gathered a small number of us together at Chancery Lane. Matt was very taken by the Manhattan Project of lawyers in the States who had done some groundbreaking work in this area. And he was also galvanized by his daughter, who said, "Daddy, what are you doing for climate change?" My son asked me that recently, having watched one of the David Attenborough Netflix documentaries, and was rather bored when I regaled him with the last 30 years of what I had been doing for climate change, which wasn't quite the answer I think he'd been expecting. But I think what this highlights from those beginnings, how fast, and almost like a forest fire, forgive the analogy, the Australians on this link, but how fast this has taken light in a little over 18 months. About a year ago, and I checked my diary because I couldn't believe it was only a year ago, about 120 of us met for a physical hack in Canary Wharf. It was much more my kind of hack, I have to say, with post-it notes and pens and posters. And there were 120 disparate lawyers in a room, some from private practice, some from NGOs, some from government, in-house, from all sectors of our profession. And we were led by this rather interesting looking chap with wild hair and a French horn who kept honking the horn at various moments. Ben's left us while I mention him. But I thought nothing will come of this. This is just crazy. How is this sort of cornucopia going to produce anything worthwhile? Well, how wrong I was. By the end of the day, small productive groups had gathered. I was an expert in asset finance, which is an environmental lawyer I'm not. I sat with a group of young lawyers who did asset finance. They taught me through their precedents. I shared with them some of the goals and objectives that I'd picked up from drafting over the years in the environmental sector. And in amazing speed, we produced something that was really very, very good quality in terms of drafting, and threw that in the pot with what was going on all around the room that day and what followed up, the work in the drafting and the follow-up. Absolutely astonishing, and really invigorating and enlightening to show that as a profession we can work together, we can offer our time. I know sometimes we get very bad press, but actually to see the profession come together like this. And also I think the key element, and this is something that Matt takes great credit for, fine for people like me to sit in rooms with like-minded environmental lawyers. But the real strength of the Chancery Lane project is that it has set on fire non-environmental lawyers and made them realize that actually they can do something and it does matter in their work area. So I think the real strength of Chancery Lane is that it picks up all areas of practice and all areas of our legal drafting and gives people the tools. So many times people say to me, I want to get involved, I don't know what I can do. Well, this is what we can do, people. This is what we're good at, words and drafting. Now, I'm old enough to remember the first iteration of green leases that came out in the UK, and we sort of offered them as an optional extra. Would you like the green lease, sir? No, not today. I'll stick with your standard precedent. And it didn't really have traction. And I think one of the real ways and the real levers we can force change is that everybody's standard precedents should be on message, and you have to opt out rather than opt in. And I think this is one of the great movements that we are going to get to. Zali talked about the Climate Change Act and the UK taking the lead, and I'm delighted that we can remember days when the UK did take the lead in things. We're not quite still there now, but I think the whole ESG agenda and the pressure we're seeing, particularly from the finance community, and I think the finance community is the real key to unlocking everything here. We have the TCFD, we've got SECR reporting, got more and more pressure on corporates to report what they're doing, but refreshingly, corporates want to do the right thing. No longer is it acceptable on a board to say, well, I don't really care, we just want to make money, greenwash this. It's not acceptable anymore, and people do genuinely want to do the right thing. And it's encouraging that we've now got the right tools to put in their hands to do the right thing and to drive this whole agenda. We stand at a pivotal moment in the UK with Brexit and COVID and political things that are going on in the world. In the US, this hack hasn't been going quite long enough for the US election result, and we'll have to keep pushing to lunchtime in the hope that we will keep this going long enough. And of course, in Australia, as Zali's mentioned, the sort of political climate and some of the sort of extreme weather conditions keep this at the top of the agenda. So I think we stand at a pivotal moment for the Chancery Lane project and for the world. Actually, this is a real chance to tip over that horizon and go upwards and onwards with this whole agenda. So I want to thank particularly the Chancery Lane staff on this call and Matt Gingell for starting this and whose brainwave given birth to this. But I want to thank everybody else as well who's contributed up to this point. And we go into this morning's drafting sessions in the UK. I'm joining the infrastructure section this morning, really invigorated. And for those of you who can still be awake at 12 noon, please do join the plenary session for the finish of what has been a truly remarkable 24-hour period. So congratulations, Chancery Lane Project, and cheers. And here's to moving the agenda forward in the coming years and months. Well done, everybody.
Oh, thank you so much, Carolyn. I'm not sure if you spotted, but you got some claps on some different screens. So that's just tremendous. I'm just going to share my screen now. So we've got, where do we go in this next jurisdiction? Just a reminder, we're back in EMEA. So for the last session, what does that look like? Well, we're in the handover now. These time zones are UK local time. So if you're in Europe, add an hour to that. You mentioned that you'll be in the infrastructure session, Caroline. That's running alongside some other content creation sessions, asset management, climate engagement and education, content for climate on television. Very exciting. Rewilding, transport and logistics. All of those will start with a half-hour introduction to content creation. We've got a bit of a break. They start on the hour. And we've also got a using model clauses that starts at 9 a.m. After those last sessions are finished at midday is the closing plenary. We're delighted to have Becky Klissman from Practical Law, Diane Harris, and Diane's actually on the call today as well. So Diane will be speaking, Sarah Oliver Semler as well from the Bank of America, and Janetta from Clyde & Co. So the closing plenary will bring it all together. As if we haven't been inspired enough, I know that we'll leave that one even more so, and invigorated to take this drafting ahead. Next up, I've got a video for you. So it's not often you go, here's one I prepared earlier, but I can do that now. So I've got a short video just for the people in the new we're coming back to the UK. For people who haven't joined us yesterday, here's a little bit of inspiration to get you started for your hacking. Thanks for joining the Chancery Lane Project's Big Hack 2020. I'm Ellie, and I'm here today to introduce you to some major climate concepts that will help. And what climate solution we need to bring about. And what tools can I use for robust climate drafting? Well, here are some questions for when you're brainstorming with your groups. First, what is the real world climate problem? Does the activity or sector have high emissions? Is it particularly vulnerable to climate hazards? Damage or disruption will affect economies and communities. By way of example, both of these challenges apply to the infrastructure sector, so people working on that theme will need to make sure that they're rewiring contracts to tackle both these issues. Next, what is the legal angle to the climate problem? Now, this is where your legal expertise comes in. Do contractual terms currently incentivize parties to continue emitting? Are they silent on climate when they could help unlock the solutions? Third, you need to ask, what is the legal solution to that problem? Do you need to draft a new term or amend an existing contractual norm to remove a barrier or incentivize a solution? Is it a nudge to put climate on the table, or a hard obligation to help bring about a specific climate solution, like reduced emissions? This is the creative bit. Now, lastly, you need to ask, how will my legal solution help solve the real world problem? So, what would be the real world climate outcomes if this clause is used in a specific contract, and in aggregate if it becomes a contractual norm? Will it unlock finance for zero or low emissions energy or infrastructure? Will it lead to climate resilient development? You don't need to develop a methodology to test this, but you should be able to describe the pathway from your legal solution to a potential positive climate outcome. So, what will help with these steps? We have a 15-minute video on our website on the building blocks for drafting climate solutions. This covers the Paris Agreement warming limits and net zero emission goal. It points you to the systems transitions solutions set out in the IPCC's 2018 special report on 1.5 degrees. And it gives you some tools to use in your drafting: carbon budgets, science-based emissions reduction targets, and the TCFD framework for climate risk management and disclosure. These are some starting points for drafting robust legal solutions to tackle climate change. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the big hack. Okay. So that is the formalities over. Thank you so much to Zali Stegall for passing that baton so expertly. I feel like as a sports person, you've done that before. And Carolyn for receiving it with grace and with invigoration for the sessions this morning ahead. Really excited to hear you'll be in the infrastructure session. And thank you to our facilitators. So particularly the facilitators that have just been very busy over the last 6 hours or so in APAC. I can see a few of you on the call. So Phoebe and Charlie and Mingzi and Brian and Abigail and a few others as well. Without your expertise that you've put in, your time to train up, to unlock other lawyers, to make it so easy that you can have someone show up to a session, I'm not sure what I can add, and within 2 minutes, a lawyer is connecting the dots between their legal expertise and the climate solutions is so exciting, and that's we're so grateful to you for all that you've brought to the session. If you are hacking this morning, you've got a little bit of a break. The next sessions start on the hour. And if you're leaving us, have a lovely weekend. Take care, stay safe, and please do keep in touch with all of us, because you're part of our community, and we need you to take these clauses forward, the drafting, to use them in your contracts, to share them with your networks, to make sure that we mainstream this in a way in which Zali and Carolyn spoke about today.